Welcome to Between the Sheets, the podcast where we're going to cover a variety of topics related to sexual health and wellness. I'm Dr. Stephanie Zwanitzer, your host. I'm a nurse practitioner and have been in practice since 2017. I have my Doctor of Nursing Practice degree, and I specialize in urology and sexual health. I am so excited to explore all of the various topics related to sexual health and wellness with you in a fun, spicy, educational, and non-judgmental manner. So come on, let's get between the sheets. Hey everybody, welcome back to Between the Sheets. I have a special guest on with us today. This is Angela Griffith. She is a challenger of the status quo and a disruptor of what has always been. She is known as the Christian sexpert to over 100,000 social media followers, something I have to ascribe for yet. She has dedicated over 20 years to the study of the human sexuality and God's design for sex. Her passion is coaching women to discover a healthier relationship with their God-given sexuality. She is a sex and intimacy coach and uses her social media platform to provide the sex education you wish you had received. She has created multiple products designed to improve the sexual and non-sexual intimacies in your marriage. She will have you reaching and clutching for your pearls. She will make you laugh, make you blush, and make you search your Bible asking, is she serious? Is that in there? She and her husband have one child. She is the leader of International Women's Ministry, Natural Christian Mamas, a homeschooler, a lover of all things glitter, same, and ready to get you on the path and with your husband and telling you to go have great sex. So welcome, Angela.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited.
Yes, I am too. And I'm excited to have a different viewpoint. So, usually on here, I'm talking from kind of a medical experience and kind of talking about the various aspects of sex, medically, psychologically, things like that. But there are these different views, whether it is religious or cultural or whatever, that definitely influence our sex lives. So I know you have a particular view on that. So do you kind of want to share where you're coming from with everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. So in evangelical Christian culture, for a very long time, there has been this narrative surrounding sex that God created men to need sex and women just don't enjoy it like men do because we just weren't created to need it in the same way. And um, there's also narratives that get taught things like men need sex every 3 days. If your husband is using pornography or cheating, like how often were you giving him sex? Like making it the wife's responsibility for
Right.
his bad decisions. And I am really counterculture to all of those popular teachings in the evangelical church because I'm like, none of these things are in the Bible. The
Right.
Bible never says God created men to need sex. I think that women enjoy sex just as much as men.
For
We are
sure.
just not socialized and conditioned to be allowed to express our sexuality in the
Yeah.
same way that men are. And so I make a lot of people very angry. um but I also have a lot of people going, "Oh my gosh, you are so right." Like
Yeah.
that is not what the scripture says. Why have I thought that all of these years?
Right.
Um and really giving women in particular the freedom to express their sexuality, but also providing education for their husbands because there's because women are not allowed to express their sexuality, there's a lack of education about female sexuality, female pleasure,
Absolutely.
and how our experience of sexuality is different than the male experience of sexuality, which society has deemed as the norm.
Sure. Right. Yeah. And I think that that's spot on. And I think one of the other things is, like you mentioned, that women aren't supposed to want to have sex because that's what we're taught as a culture. And movies portray that and everything. And I call BS. Like, women love sex and women need sex for our stress relief and all of those things too. So I think it's so important to have this conversation, especially for those of us that grew up in hush hush conversations about sex, or the only conversation you had about sex was you wait until you're married and then you're told you can have sex, but nobody talks to you about why or how or anything, or that it's okay to have sex for pleasure and intimacy and connection with your spouse versus procreation.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, that's two really big issues that I face with a lot of my clients is my clients who have grown up in the purity culture movement. I make people really angry with that one too, because I'm like, purity culture has to go. And people don't understand that purity culture is a specific set of teachings that became popular in sort of like the late 70s, 80s as a reaction to the free love movement of the 60s, and it's still being taught in some pockets today. And it relied on high shame and control tactics as a way to try and control teenagers' behavior,
mhm.
but it never gave a proper sexual education. And it just used shame, things like there were actual books that were marketed for tweens, 10 to 12-year-olds, who said things like, make sure that your belly is covered because grown men find bellies intoxicating.
Mm,
Like, and that little girl's going to grow up having no sex education, believing her body is shameful and something
right,
that can cause grown men to sin. And she's going to get married and supposed to turn into the sex goddess after a 20-minute ceremony.
right,
Doesn't
right.
make sense.
Yeah.
And
So let's
women,
go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, women who are raised in purity culture are twice as likely to experience female sexual dysfunction as those who are not raised in it. And
Yeah.
so we have to do better. We have to stop the cycle.
Mhm.
Um, and you said something else and I lost the plot, but that's a lot right there.
Yeah.
That's a lot right
So
there.
So let's talk about that sex goddess. So now you have the opportunity to have sex, you're ready to have sex, like you're bonding with your partner, you want this spicy life. Like how do they connect? How do these people grow and change and talk about their sexuality with each other, and kind of what's your take on that?
So there's a couple things. From the very beginning, I tell my engaged couples, there's no pressure to have sex on your wedding night. You don't have to engage in penetrative sex on your wedding night. You're exhausted. You're probably going to feel filthy because you're like, especially the woman's going to be covered in 10 pounds of makeup she doesn't normally wear. I had an entire package of bobby pins in my hair. By the time that we managed to get them all out, my scalp hurt,
Right.
right? Um, and maybe you like have some anticipatory anxiety. And so we know that obligation kills desire. So you have to remove the obligation for sexual performance from the equation on your wedding night and beyond. That's one of the first things. You have the rest of your lives to figure out how to have sex together. It
Mhm.
doesn't have to be on day one. And the other thing that I talk about is spending a lot of time slowing down and exploring each other's bodies in ways that make you both feel comfortable and excited. But one of the big things that I work with my clients on is a sex journal,
Mm.
because a lot of people have this fear of their spouse finding out they're interested in activity and being rejected or feeling judged because they're interested in something. Like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, why would you want to do that? What is wrong with you? Like, that is
Sure.
way too kinky or something like that. And realistically, I don't think there are there are instances where something that your spouse is interested in will be a legitimate turnoff.
Mhm.
But I think it happens far less often than people have anxiety about it really happening. And so I encourage my clients to start a sex journal. And so a sex journal is just a pretty notebook that makes your heart sparkle. And you start off by writing three things. The last time we had sex, I really loved. I
Mhm.
didn't so much love. And the next time that we have sex, I would like to try.
Oh,
And
that's
then,
great.
yes. And then I tell them, then you're going to give it to your spouse and you're not going to make it weird and stare into their soul as they read it. Right.
Yeah.
Cause that's a thing that a lot of women want to do is like stare at him and judge his face for every single muscle twitch.
Right.
Right. You're going to give him the privacy to read it in peace. And then the beauty of the sex journal is even if they do have the, oh, I didn't know that that was a thing that they were interested in sort of reaction, they can get their face under control. And
Yeah.
you're not going to see it, and it's not going to blow up into some big marital conflict. Um, and then they're going to read it. They're going to respond. They're going to write, the last time we had sex, I really loved. I didn't so much love, and I would like to try. But then they're also going to get curious and ask questions about what you wrote. Oh, I didn't know that you didn't like when we did that thing. What about it? What is it about it that you don't like?
Hmm.
Or, oh, I had no idea that you were interested in this activity. What about that is appealing to you? Right? They
Sure.
can get curious. Um, and when we are met with curiosity rather than even assumed judgment, things flow a lot easier.
Hmm.
And eventually that strengthens their communication skills so they can start having verbal communication about it. But it's a stepping stone to
Hmm.
bigger, greater, bigger. That's what she said things.
I love it. No, I think that's great. Leave it on their pillow for them to read at a time where you're not there, or,
Yep.
you leave to go to work and you leave it on the kitchen counter so they can read it when you're gone and kind of come back later and talk about it. I think that's a fantastic idea. I love that.
Yeah,
And especially if it's a pretty journal. Who doesn't love a pretty journal?
exactly.
So fast forward to later on as they're married, and, you know, what we like changes, what we want
Absolutely.
changes. And so how do you keep the journal going throughout your relationship? How do you kind of keep that intimacy growing and changing?
Absolutely. In fact, I just launched a course talking about exactly that, that you are not sleeping next to the same person that you married 20 years ago.
Mhm.
I have been married for 21 years. My body cannot do the things that it did in bed 21 years ago. I don't bend that way anymore.
Right.
Like, and, beyond the fact that our emotional and mental and intellectual state grows and changes, but human our human brains are designed to look for the path of least resistance. And so, even in bed, we automatically go to the same things that we have always done because our brain takes that path of least resistance. And so, it takes work to acknowledge the fact that we need to do something different because, you know, our bodies don't like that anymore, or things have changed
Mhm.
hormonally, things have changed. I cannot tell you the number of women who loved to do nipple play or breast sex and things like that prior to having children, but children and nursing absolutely turned any sort of touch on their breasts or their nipples into a jump out of their skin experience.
Mm.
And that really has an impact on their sex life
Sure.
because your husband can't understand why something that was so mutually pleasurable before has become, do it again, I'm going to stab you in the eye sort of reaction.
Right.
Um, for so many women describe that sort of very visceral reaction.
Yeah.
And so I do think falling back on the sex journal, because the other thing is everything in life has seasons, mountaintop seasons, valley seasons, and our sex life is no exemption. So there will be phases of life where you guys are relying heavily on a sex journal, and then it sort of fades and you aren't using it anymore. And then you guys realize, oh, we're in this valley season of our sex life. What tools do we have to fall back on to get us out of the valley season? And then other things could be, I have a product called the Marriage Playdate. It's a list of 500 activities that you can do with your spouse in bed. And
Mm.
you go through, you give everything a rating, and then you compare your ratings and see where you line up. And so even that list can change over
Sure.
the years. You know, things that you would have been a hard limit 5 years ago might be "Hmm, I might be willing to try that" sort of thing now.
Yeah.
And so doing something like that every few years to as sort of a check-in, where you guys are can be really helpful.
Mhm. Have you had couples who are kind of struggling at a certain time? Like you said, there's mountaintops and valleys. We all go through them in our personal lives, our relationships, everything like that. So, if you're kind of in a valley, what are some of the tips and tricks you tell your clients to help pull them back out of that and get back on the same page with their partner, or explore something new to kind of get that reconnection and fun back in their sex life?
One of the things that is controversial with some of my clients is I tell them to take sex off the table.
Hmm,
Because if you are struggling, continuing to focus and put all of your attention on the struggle never fixes the problem,
sure.
ever. And so removing the pressure of performative fixing of the problem can help heal the problem. So one of the pillars of the work that I do is talking about the 12 types of intimacy. There's 12 types of intimacy we can experience in marriage. Sex is only one of them. And so sex is if you're looking at it from a like eagle eye holistic point of view, sex is 1/12 of what you need to keep the relationship healthy.
Mm.
And if you're relying on sex to create and maintain the intimacy in your marriage, like it's going to topple because you're not building on all 12 of the things that you need to build on. So if you're deeply struggling in one of those areas, back off of that area for a while, focus on the other 11 things, and eventually it will start to rebuild itself because you're healing in all of these other areas as well, because all of the intimacies are interconnected.
Mhm.
And so taking sex off the table for 2 to 4 weeks is often and it's a very intentional sort of thing. It's not just, "We're going to continue on with business as usual and just not do anything to work on the relationship." It's a very intentional, "All right, we're gonna take sexual activity off the table, but then we're going to intentionally connect in these other ways." And, you're gonna set I really like to talk with my clients about setting measurable, actionable goals that you can say, did we meet this goal? Not, we're just going to try and connect.
Yeah.
How?
Right.
How, when, how often? Versus, okay, 3 times this week, over 3 times a week for the next 2 to 4 weeks, we're going to engage in recreational activity at least 3 times a week for at least 20 minutes each of those 3 times. And we are going to twice over the next 2 to 4 weeks are going to sit down and discuss our conflict intimacy and review how we are engaging in conflict with each other. And that gives you a specific time frame and specific ways that you are going to work on things.
Okay.
Versus I'm just gonna try. I hate it when my clients say that. "Oh,
Yeah.
well, I'm trying." But how?
Right.
Tell me how. Tell me
Yeah.
how you're trying.
Yeah,
You
for
just
sure. Yes. So let's debunk some myths about sex with the Christian viewpoint. So, what are some things that your clients come to you and say, oh, we're not supposed to do that? And you're like, yeah, it's totally fine. Go for it.
Oh, one of the big things that you will hear a lot in certain Christian circles is that sex has to end with the man ejaculating inside of the woman. That you're not allowed to spill seed on the ground. That comes from a one verse, one sentence in the entirety of the Bible. One sentence. So the story in the Bible is about a man named Onan. And in Jewish culture, if your brother died and left his wife a widow, then you had to take his wife as your own wife and provide her with a son so that she had heirs. This restored her place in society and prevented her from becoming homeless. It protected her. And Onan was a selfish, self-centered, spiteful little man. And he did not want to provide his brother an heir because the thing was, in that culture, the child from that mating, that marriage, would be given the brother's name as well.
Mm,
And he didn't want to give his brother an heir. So he laid with her, but rather than ejaculating inside of her, he spilled his seed on the ground. So not only has he acted like he was going to offer her the protection that she was entitled to, he deceived her in that, basically sexually assaulted her because
hmm
he was having the sex but did not finish where he was supposed to finish to ensure her protection. So now she's feeling violated. And it was all because of the spite in his heart. And so God killed him. And so Christians say, well, Onan died because he spilled seed on the ground.
mm,
No, no, God killed him because of his spiteful heart, not because the Bible also tells us God looks at our hearts, not our actions, because
Hmm.
he knows that our actions come from our heart. So
Sure.
that is a big one that I see so many Christians. Um, and so if you're following that sort of theology, they'll say things like oral sex is sinful because you're
Mm.
not finishing inside of her. But we have evidence of oral sex in the Song of Solomon.
Right.
So that's another big one.
Yeah. Yeah. Song of Solomon is a dirty book.
It
Love that
is
book. Yeah, it's like the porn of the Bible. It's great.
really
I
is.
remember when I was early married and I was taught about that book, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. But any other like major things that like how some people think oral sex is wrong? What about anal or something else with that people might think is wrong and there actually is no justification for that?
So the Bible does not specifically prohibit anal sex between a married husband and wife. Um, it might talk about it in reference to other sorts of pairings, but it does not prohibit it between a married um, husband and wife. And one of the things that I really emphasize is consent. So
Yes.
you might be uninterested in anal because the idea does not appeal to you, which is totally valid. But you don't get to call it sin in an
Right.
effort to try and avoid it.
Sure.
And you don't get to call it sin for other people because there simply is no evidence to back that up. And
Sure.
along the same lines, another one that I really tick people off on is sex toys.
Yep.
Um, they get so mad when I talk about using sex toys. And the thing is, we have archaeological evidence of sex toys being a thing before the Bible was ever written.
Hmm.
So, my thing is, if God really cared about us using things that were not attached to our bodies, then he had every opportunity to tell us when he was writing the Bible, and he never did. So that makes them what we call a personal conviction issue. If you don't want to use them, don't. But I just 2 days ago got into it with this woman in my ministry group because she was like, men just won't tell you this, but they actually don't like sex toys because it makes them feel less than. No, I'm sorry that your husband feels threatened by a piece of plastic. And I'm
Right.
sorry that his ego is so very fragile.
Yes.
He should probably see someone about that. But my husband says, why would I reach for a screwdriver when I've got a power drill
Right.
available? Is
Yep.
my He thinks he's hilarious with that one. That's like pinnacle dad joke for him.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
Um, the thing is, and the thing, oh, I get going about this one because first of all, so there's no biblical prohibition against the use of sex toys, but also to say that no Christians and no one should be using sex toys is ableist. It is
Mm.
ableism to say that. Women need 14 to 20 minutes of direct clitoral stimulation in order to orgasm. That means that most women are not going to be able to orgasm from penetration alone. Some people lack the physical ability to provide 14 to
Hmm.
20 minutes of direct clitoral stimulation in order to make her orgasm. And they need the use of a sex toy to get her to be able to even enjoy sex at all.
Right.
And so when you call it sin and say no one should be using it, it's ableist because there's a whole community of people who are living with disabilities who are not doing it for funsies. I mean, they're
Right.
doing it for funsies, but not
But it's also out of necessity.
it's necessity.
Right.
And so
Right.
you want to condemn them to just never having an orgasm? And those are the same women who will say, "Well, you have to have sex with your husband because he needs it or he'll cheat on you." Right?
Mm.
It's the woman's pleasure is completely irrelevant to the equation with that type of person.
Right. Right.
So, I could rant about that one all day. All day.
Yes. Well, I'm a big proponent of sex toys. I think they're awesome. I think they definitely enhance not only in a relationship, but definitely learning your own body and what works for you as well. I think is really important for that
Yes.
too. Yeah, what a fun conversation today. This was great. I love it. Always good to get some different viewpoints and some tips and tricks for people to kind of re-engage and enhance and let go of maybe some old thinking that they were raised with. So I really appreciate you being on here today. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me. I loved it.
Absolutely. And I'll include a link in the description of the show today so you guys can get in touch with Angela if you want some more Christian sexpert information.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great day, everybody.
Go have good sex.
Thank you for listening and spending time with me today. You can catch new episodes of Between the Sheets every Wednesday. Because what better way to add some spice to your life than to have a new podcast on Hump Day? We will continue to explore common, uncommon, and taboo topics related to sexual health and wellness. Please send any comments, questions, or stories to podcastbetweenthesheets@gmail.com. That's all one word, podcastbetweenthesheets@gmail.com. Have a great day. And remember how important it is to discuss these topics with your friends, your family, and of course your partners. In fact, you can like, follow, and share this podcast so they can see it too. See you next time for more sexual health topics between the sheets.